We have moved on to the state of Louisiana for 2023 ballot initiative results. You know, we are working our way up to the ballot measures that will be on the ballot this year for 2024. I don't have that many states left for 2023 results. And we are now at Louisiana. Louisiana does not feature the power of initiative for either citizen initiated constitutional amendments or initiated state statutes. Only the Louisiana legislature has the power to bring forth initiatives as legislatively referred constitutional amendment to amend their constitution by voter ratification. The following appeared on Saturday, October 14th, the same day as the governor's runoff race. Here are the results. Louisiana Amendment 1. Ban on private or foreign funding of election cost amendment. That was October 2023. So this measure was ratified by 72.56%. This is interesting. A yes vote supports prohibiting state and local governments from using funds, goods, and services donated by foreign governments and non-governmental private sources for the purpose of conducting elections. So what would Amendment 1 do? The amendment would prohibit funds, goods, and services donated by a foreign government or non-governmental private source for use in conducting elections. Specifically, it would add a provision to the Louisiana Constitution stating no funds, goods, or services donated by a foreign government or a non-governmental source shall be used to conduct elections unless provided for in the election code and subject to restrictions provided by general law. Do other states have bans on private funding for election administration? As of January 2023, 25 states had enacted legislation to prohibit private funding for election administration. According to the NCSL, these laws were enacted in 2021 or 2022. 21 of the 25 states that have enacted legislation restricting the use of private funds for election administration had Republican trifectas at the time of the enactment. The remaining 4 had divided governments. This is the first state constitutional amendment designed to ban private or foreign election funding. So this is a big deal. Little note here from Roger. Even in a state that appears red, but out of the 3 million plus registered voters, registered Democrats make up 39.61%, the GOP 33.35%, but independent, which has the swing vote power, 27.04%, hating corruption of elected officials is universal. So you guys see this? This is another example where independents actually can have power, particularly when it comes to ballot measures and corruption. Who supported this measure here? State Representative Blake Miguez, who's a Republican, organizations like Association of Mature American Citizens. What an interesting name. What if I create an organization called Association of Immature American Citizens? One of the arguments was the State Freedom Caucus Network has been working with the Louisiana Freedom Caucus, as well as the Election Integrity Network, to help build local awareness in Louisiana about this important amendment. It is crucial for election integrity in Louisiana to keep Zucker bucks and foreign money out of the realm of influence in America's election. Interesting, folks. Again, red state, right? Organizations, Democracy Docket, actually opposed this. Their argument was, should voters approve the ban in October, Louisiana will be the latest GOP state to enact such a ban. These measures are fueled by election conspiracy theories and could make chronic underfunding of our election office even worse. Yeah, that was not a good argument against it. There was no campaign money spent on it to support or oppose that measure. I'm sorry, that was not a good argument against it. So let's go into question 2. Here we go. Louisiana Amendment 2, constitutional right to worship in a church or place of worship amendment, October 2023. A yes vote supports providing in the state constitution that the freedom to worship in a church or other place of worship is a fundamental right that is worthy of the highest order of protection, and providing that a legal challenge brought against a state or a local government action for conflicting with the right would be required to be examined by a court with strict scrutiny. This measure actually was ratified by 79.19%. Now, some of you are wondering, why was this even an issue? I think this stems from the pandemic, like during that time where they said that even places of worship, like if you had lockdowns, you could not go to places of worship either, and physicality, right? So I think that's what this is in reference to. Let's go down a little bit more. There's a note here from Roger Meadows. This was a complete rejection to the outgoing term-limited Democrat Governor Bell Edwards, who instituted lockdowns violating the First Amendment for people to gather at a place of worship. So yeah, which is probably also why they chose a Republican governor to replace him, who got more than 50% of the vote in the open primary, and therefore no runoff is needed in November. Who supported this? State Senator Beth Mizell. One of the arguments for it was the freedom to peacefully assemble and the freedom of religious expression were casualties of the pandemic. While some may consider our freedom of religious expression and our right to worship with our spiritual family an optional privilege, I urge you to recognize that this is an absolute right and must never again be compromised in times of crisis. So, yeah, I'm not even going to go through the argument against it. I think you guys already know what that was about. But again, about the pandemic, there was no campaign finance money spent to support it or oppose it. So that was interesting. But yes, that was ratified. And we'll go into this one about the retirement. I think this one's interesting as well. Louisiana Amendment 3, state retirement system. Again, October 2023. A yes vote supports requiring a minimum of 25% of state revenue that is designed as non-recurring to be applied to the balance of the unfunded liability of the state retirement system. Interesting. So let's dive into what it could do here. The allocated funds would need to be used by each retirement system to pay off the oldest debts first. The amendment authorizes the state legislature to provide for in-state law for determining how to distribute the one-time funds among the retirement systems that have debts. If the state legislature does not create a law outlining the distribution requirements, the amendment provides that funds must be distributed proportionally based on each system total debt compared to the overall debt of all state systems. This is done by using the most recent valuations provided by the Public Retirement System Actuarial Committee. None of the funds given to a retirement system could be used to fund cost of living increases. The state retirement system, including the Louisiana State Employees Retirement System, the teacher retirement system, the Louisiana School Employees Retirement System, and the Louisiana State Police Retirement System. Going into the election, the minimum requirement was 10%. So that's interesting. And it shows a following table lists the underfunded accrued liability of the state retirement funds as of June 30th, 2022. Interesting. Unfunded accrued liability of state pension systems. So it's those teacher retirement system of Louisiana there, and shows all the amounts listed there. And then I want to mention who supported it. Who supported it? State Representative Richard Nelson and Barrow Peacock. It's an interesting name. Who names their kid Barrow? Both Republicans there. Who opposed it? It looks like no one opposed it. And there was no campaign finance money spent to support or oppose it. A note here from Roger Meadows, this one received a little under 1 million votes, 995,333 to be exact, probably most likely because the average voter did not understand the question or they felt it does not apply to them. So they left it blank. And that is not uncommon, ladies and gentlemen. Sometimes these questions can be worded in such a way that it's very difficult to understand. And that's on purpose. That's on purpose. The following are BIs put on the ballot by the Louisiana legislature, which took place on November 18th, a week or two after the general election date. Okay, so that's important. These are amendments. Louisiana Amendment 1, gubernatorial deadlines on bills and legislative veto sessions. This actually was ratified by 61.3%. A yes vote supported the governor's deadline to act on a bill is based on the legislative session in which the bill was passed rather than whether or not the legislature is in session. And the legislator may consider vetoed bills during a regular or extraordinary session rather than convening a separate veto session. The constitutional amendment provided that the governor must act within 10 days after it is delivered rather than the former 20 days while the legislature is in the session in which the bill was passed. Otherwise, the governor has 20 days to act if the legislator, I'm sorry, I lost my spot here. Whoops. Oh, here we go. The governor has 20 days to act if the legislative session in a bill was passed was adjourned. If a bill is vetoed, it must be returned to the legislator with the veto message within 12 days after it was delivered to the governor. The governor can return a vetoed bill after the legislative session in which the bill passed has adjourned as provided by state law. Who supported this? State Representative Gregory Miller. There was no money spent to support or oppose it. Interesting. Louisiana Amendment 2. Remove constitutional references to inactive state funds amendment. This measure passed, it was ratified by 54.70%. So that's kind of close, like almost there, but not quite. A yes vote supported repealing constitutional provisions establishing various state funds that are now inactive and allows for remaining money in the funds to be transferred to the state general fund. What did the amendment do? The amendment repealed constitutional provisions establishing the following state funds, which were inactive. So we have the Atchafalaya Basin Conservation Fund, the Higher Education Louisiana Partnership Fund, the Millennium Leverage Fund, the Agricultural and Seafood Products Support Fund, First Use Tax Trust Fund, and Louisiana Investment Fund for Enhancement. Interesting. Who supported this? State Representative Polly Thomas. There was no opposition for this measure. And these are just some of the examples here that they've used before. Like, for example, Agricultural and Seafood Products Support Fund. There's also, there was a tobacco one I passed, right? Oh, the Higher Education Louisiana Fund. So they show you the year that these were adopted as well. And it said odd year ballot measures in Louisiana. A total of 56 constitutional amendments appeared on the statewide ballot in Louisiana during odd numbered years from 1999 through 2021. Of the 56 amendments, 37, which 67.27%, were approved and 19, 34.54%, were defeated. Interesting. Property tax. What's interesting is a lot of states had property tax measures on the ballot. A lot of them. So whether it was 2022 or 2023. Property taxes. First Responders Amendment. Listen to this. A yes vote supported authorizing local governments to provide an additional property tax exemption of up to $2,500 for first responders, including firefighters, emergency medical service personnel, emergency response dispatchers, peace officers, police officers, and sheriffs. In addition to their homestead property tax exemption, an annual application and documentation is required to claim the exemption. To qualify for the exemption, first responders have to reside in the same parish their employer is located in. So that's important to note. But it was ratified by 54.70%. So that part there where you have to reside in the same parish your employer is located in. So for example, you obviously can't live like in another town if you're working in one town or something like that. That's important to pay attention to. But look at that, guys. Property tax exemptions for first responders. I don't think any of us should have to pay property taxes. I don't think any of us should have to pay property taxes, but that's just me. Okay, it goes on to say here who supported this: State Senator Royce Duplessis, Democrat. And there was no opposition, and there was no money spent to support or oppose that measure. So interesting. And then I think one more. I thought there was one more here. Did I go past it? Here we go. Louisiana Amendment 4, Revenue Stabilization Trust Fund Amendment. A yes vote supported allowing the state legislature through a 2/3 majority vote to use up to $250 million of funds in the Revenue Stabilization Trust Fund to alleviate a budget deficit. This measure failed by 55.99%. It was also pretty close there. It goes on to say here, what would this amendment have done? This amendment would have removed the state legislature's current authority to appropriate revenue from the fund in an emergency with no cap on withdrawals. The amendment would have allowed the state legislature, after using the maximum allowable funds from the Budget Stabilization Fund, to use up to $250 million of funds in the Revenue Stabilization Trust Fund to alleviate a budget deficit in a current fiscal year or next fiscal year if an official forecast projects a deficit. And you would need a 2/3 vote, right? So that's interesting. Who supported that? State Representative Polly Thomas. She's Republican. There was no opposition, and there was no money spent to support or oppose. There is a note here from Roger Meadows, who actually collects all the information for the ballot measures. Roger said, "It sounds like to me they wanted to try to use the fund to do something other than what it was originally created for, and agreed to by the voters, which was to finance infrastructure. So they tried to sneak through this right underneath the voters' noses, not only by putting on the ballot in an odd numbered year, but 1 to 2 weeks after general election day in November, and the voters caught them. It makes you wonder if this was the plan from the start, seeing that Louisiana is not a CBI state, that instead it was put there by the legislature. That's why I always say check for those initiatives if you don't feel like voting for politicians." And that's very well said there, Roger. That's it for us for Louisiana. But very well said in the sense that I know some of you said you don't want to vote for president at all. You don't want to vote for anyone. Some of you have told me you're just going to vote for the couch. And I always push back on that, because even if you decide that none of the presidential candidates are for you, especially if you live in a ballot initiative state, you should still go vote for those ballot measures. That is going to affect you. It is your state. So I always say that, right? Yeah, that's right, Jacqueline. Jacqueline said Roger is brilliant. That's right. Yeah. And I talked about these before, some of the measures we passed here in Massachusetts, which I think have been really great. Like, I remember when we legalized, marijuana here. That was a ballot measure, guys. We actually voted on that. Direct democracy. And direct democracy is great because, again, it's the voters voting for the policy themselves instead of electing these politicians and asking them to represent you and hoping that they do the right thing. And a lot of times they don't do the right thing, right? Based. I forget what else we passed. Oh, the millionaire tax. The millionaire tax in Massachusetts. Do you guys know, like, this is why we now have free school lunch for kids here? Yeah, because we passed the millionaire tax in 2022. Hells yeah. JB said recreational marijuana is on the ballot this year in Florida. Oof. And you guys got DeSantis. Interesting. Because I believe in Florida, the governor can still, you'll have to let me know, JB. If I remember correctly, I think in Florida, can't the governor, they still overturn it or something? I forget. They work differently in different states.